The wind howled across the frozen north, carrying whispers of secrets as old as the land itself. At the very edge of the known world, where the wall of pale sky met ancient drifts of snow, figures moved with quiet purpose. Their steps were impossibly light, as if they weighed no more than leaves. In truth, they were smaller than men, slender-limbed but imbued with a mystery so profound that it seemed to thread through the ice-crusted air around them. They were the children of the forest, or as they called themselves, those who had lived in these lands since before the first men. Magic shimmered in the depths of their large, gold-flecked eyes. For centuries they had dwelled in secrecy, rarely venturing forth to treat with humankind. Yet now the world churned with turmoil. The others, White Walkers as men called them, were stirring beyond the far north, growing restless and strong. An ancient threat was awakening, quietly at first, but with the potential to bring ruin to all living things. The children of the forest were not blind to this gathering darkness. Their green seers felt the shift in the winds, saw glimpses in fire-lit visions, heard murmurs echo in the roots of weirwood trees. Faced with the specter of a new long night, they made a decision that stood against generations of secrecy and distrust. They resolved to walk among humankind again, to seek an alliance that might hold the tide of death at bay before it advanced so far as to threaten Winterfell or the heartland of the south. Far away in the seat of House Stark, the snow-crowned fortress of Winterfell hummed with quiet winter tension. Though it was not yet deep winter, the air was cold enough that breath rose in clouds at dawn, and frost shimmered on the stables each morning. The Stark who ruled these lands had no name so steeped in legend as the ancient Bran or Torrhen. This was Lord Roderick Stark, a solemn man who wore the responsibilities of his house as a second skin. He had a mane of gray-shot brown hair and a beard that clung close to the edges of his jaw, making his features look even more austere. His household was filled with children, some grown, some small, and loyal men who had sworn their swords to the dire wolf banner. Lord Roderick was a thoughtful man, slow to anger and quick to observe. Rumors had reached him of fell creatures beyond the wall, more sightings of pale figures beneath the shimmering auroras and starlight. The wildlings pressed into the corners of the far north had also carried tales of rising horrors. Roderick was not one to ignore such warnings. He sent parties north of the wall to confirm or dispel the alarming rumors. None returned. That, above all else, stirred deep worry in his heart. The north had enough hardships, long winters, wildling raids, the occasional unrest among his own bannermen. But this felt different, more ominous. So he waited day by day for news. Meanwhile, he strengthened Winterfell's garrison, readied the men for unusual threats, and prayed quietly to the old gods that the rumors were wrong. Then word came in the most unexpected form. A small retinue of travelers appeared on the outskirts of the Wolfswood, heading toward Winterfell, escorted by silent, hooded figures glimpsed only at dusk. A scout rode back to the castle with breathless tidings. "Children of the forest," he reported in a trembling voice. "At least, they look like them, my lord. There are maybe 3 of them, flanked by men in strange armor. They're asking for audience with the Lord of Winterfell." It was nearly unthinkable. The children of the forest had not been seen openly in thousands of years. That was the domain of legends, of old songs sung by the hearth fire. Even so, Lord Roderick was cautious but intrigued. He summoned his most trusted counselors, the Master-at-Arms, the Castellan, and his eldest daughter, Lysara, a woman of keen wit who often served as his steward. They gathered in the chilly great hall by the warmth of a roaring hearth, each exchanging uncertain looks at the news. "Is it some trick?" asked the Master-at-Arms, a broad-shouldered man named Rickard, his brows drawn down in a frown. "Some show of wildling cunning, hoping to slip a blade between our ribs?" Lysara shook her head. "No wildling would pretend to be the children of the forest. They fear them, if they even truly believe in them." She turned toward her father. "We should be careful, of course, but if these truly are the children, they must have come for reasons that matter." Lord Roderick rested his hands on the arms of his seat. Firelight played across the stark sigil behind him, illuminating the carved stone walls with direwolves that seemed to leap in the flicker of the flames. "I'll receive them, prepare a quiet welcome. Let them feel safe among us." His words, calm and measured, set in motion a moment that had not occurred in countless generations. The children of the forest walking into a hall of men, under a flag of peace. They arrived at sundown, which seemed fitting for so fey and mysterious a race. Their retinue came on pale horses with tufted hooves, horses that never spooked and seemed accustomed to the presence of these strange beings. The 3 children of the forest wore cloaks spun of midnight green leaves, lightly dusted with frost, and their eyes gleamed with otherworldly brilliance. Each had small, fine-boned faces and skin that resembled polished bark, with patterns reminiscent of whorls in ancient tree trunks. They walked delicately on slender feet, and around them hovered a hush so profound that the men of Winterfell found their own hearts quickened by the sight. Behind the children stood 3 figures in armor that resembled hammered bronze, though it gleamed with a darker, older patina. Their helms, shaped into subtle bestial designs, covered their faces, and they wore thick furs of silver-white wolf pelts at their shoulders. These silent guardians carried elongated spears carved with runes, the obsidian tips glinting black even in the torchlight. When they entered the courtyard, the guards watched them with understandable wariness. Yet no one drew steel, for Lord Roderick's command had been clear: treat them as honored guests. The main doors opened, revealing the warm glow of the Great Hall. In the hush that followed, the first child of the forest stepped through, the lines of their faces old as the roots of weirwoods. A hush fell over the gathered people as if the wind had ceased entirely beyond Winterfell's walls. Lord Roderick, seated at the head of the long hall, rose in respect. The watchers by the door parted, revealing the 3 travelers for all to see. The child who took the lead lifted slender hands and lowered the hood. The face beneath was neither man nor woman, and yet it possessed a delicate grace that transcended mortal beauty. Their hair was a fine tapestry of golden green, like leaves at the cusp of autumn. When they spoke, their voice was quiet and melodic, but it carried so that every soul in the hall heard clearly. I am Leaf, said the being. We come bearing an urgent warning. Lord Roderick bowed his head. Welcome to Winterfell. My hearth and home are open to you, children of the forest. We have long heard songs of your people, but never in my lifetime have I thought to see the day you would walk among men in friendship. You say you bear a warning. Speak and be heard. Leaf's gold-flecked eyes swept across the hall, lingering on the faces of those assembled, searching them, perhaps, for a spark of understanding or trust. The long night stirs once more, they said. The White Walkers awaken in the far north, planning a sweep of cold and death beyond the wall. If left unchallenged, their numbers will grow and winter's silence will be all that remains from the Frostfangs to the summer sea. A tremor passed among the gathering. The men and women of Winterfell had grown up on tales of the Long Night, the first invasion of the White Walkers. Those were old stories, half-remembered in the hush of the darkest nights. That those very threats might be stirring again was a horrifying notion. Leaf pressed on, voice soft but urgent. We children come to forge an alliance with men. We once fought alongside you against the Long Night eons ago. We used our magic and your ancestors used their bravery and steel. Together we drove the others back. The wall was raised to protect the realms of men, but the enchantments woven into its foundations weaken. The threat gathers. We must fight side by side again now before the others grow too strong to be repelled. Lord Roderick studied Leaf and the 2 other children who remained behind, watchful and silent. The watchers in bronze armor stood like statues, immovable. A thoughtful hush settled in his eyes, though his stance and expression betrayed the gravity of the tidings. You say the White Walkers are stirring now, he said carefully. My men have vanished north of the wall, scouting for signs of the rumored threat. They did not return. What would you ask of the Starks? Leaf glanced at the fires blazing in the great hearth. The dancing shadows revealed the edges of Leaf's delicate cheekbones, the shape of a faint frown. Send men and arms, gather the lords of the north, and prepare for open war. The wall must be strengthened by more than masonry and ice. Spells must be renewed, enchantments laid once more. We children will teach you the songs and runes if you are willing. Voices stirred among the Lord's bannermen. Some murmured in agreement, others showed doubt upon their faces. Roderick raised a hand, calling for silence. Though I have not seen the enemy myself, your words ring true. The losses of my scouts are evidence that something dire indeed lurks beyond the wall. And if it is indeed the White Walkers, if the Long Night threatens to fall again, the North must be ready. He paused, measuring his next words. We shall set aside old fears and distrust. We will ally with the children of the forest. He half-turned to Lysara, who stood near enough to hear. Prepare ravens to be sent south to each great house, House Tully, House Arryn, House Baratheon, House Lannister, House Tyrell, all of them. Warn them of this threat. Invite them to join a council in Winterfell so that we might stand united before the storm breaks. Lysara took a breath, her gray eyes shining. Yes, father. At once. At Lord Roderick's command, the entire hall erupted into movement. Servants rushed to accommodate the new guests, though the children of the forest politely refused any offer of food or drink beyond a small taste of clear water. Their watchers, the bronze-armored warriors, stood vigil in the courtyard. Lord Roderick provided them a place of honor near the weirwood in Winterfell's Godwood, where they could remain beneath the open sky, close to the ancient heart tree which might offer them some familiarity or comfort. Within days, ravens soared from Winterfell's rookery to every corner of the Seven Kingdoms. They carried the grim news scrawled in Roderick's own hand: the others rise again. The children of the forest have come forth to renew the old alliance. He urged the South not to dismiss these tidings as mere myth or old wives' tales. He begged them to send envoys and heed the call, lest they invite annihilation. Word traveled slowly, but the response it garnered was swifter than expected. The realm was uneasy, wars had flared and simmered down in recent years, and alliances between houses were in flux. Yet none could ignore such a dire threat, especially when corroborating rumors trickled in from disgruntled Night's Watchmen at Eastwatch by the Sea, who had seen strange shapes moving across the shattered ice floes far to the north. The houses answered one by one, some sending maesters or second sons, some offering knights and arms. King Aelor Targaryen, reigning from the Red Keep in King's Landing, sent a small royal delegation led by his cousin, Prince Burin, an untested youth but earnest in manner, known for his respect of the old traditions. From the Vale came Lord Arryn's sister, Lady Jane, a sharp-witted diplomat. House Lannister sent a gilded retinue led by Lord Tybolt Lannister, an older man with cunning in his eyes. The Riverlands provided Lord Tully's second-born son, Brian, a knight of moderate renown. House Tyrell sent a robed scholar, accompanied by several skilled swordsmen. Even House Baratheon, known for their fierce pride, complied, dispatching a stern-faced younger cousin of their line. And so, across weeks marked by lengthening shadows and the first harbingers of a harsher winter, Winterfell welcomed an unprecedented gathering. They arrived in 2s or 10s, with foot soldiers and baggage trains, some escorted by knights in shining plate, others by men-at-arms in simpler gear. Tensions simmered among them, old resentments between the Lannisters and Tullis, pointed stares exchanged by certain northerners who had not forgotten slights from the south. But the gravity of the threat overshadowed petty squabbles. Day by day, the courtyard filled with murmuring courtiers, wary guards, and the flicker of many torches. The kitchens strained to feed so many. Tents spilled beyond the walls, and watchmen paced the ramparts with ever more vigilance, aware that in this mix of lords and ladies, any infiltration could be disastrous. Then the children of the forest stepped forward to address them all. The gathering took place in a section of Winterfell's courtyard that had been cleared for the assembly. Torches ringed the open space. The great lords, knights, maesters, and dignitaries circled around, wearing thick cloaks for the chill that had settled in. On a wooden platform stood Leaf and their 2 companions, Moss and Ember, as they introduced themselves in voices like the rustle of leaves. When Leaf began to speak, the entire crowd fell silent, transfixed by the aura of quiet power that emanated from these small, ancient beings. Their words were carefully chosen, each phrase woven with glimpses of a history so distant that men could scarcely imagine it. "The White Walkers are no myth," Leaf began, turning slowly to encompass the circle of men and women. "They are as real as your flesh and bones, as inevitable as the snows. They come from a place of endless winter, from the heart of a chill we cannot name. The spells woven after the last long night have weakened through the centuries. They can be renewed, but only if men and the children stand side by side. Steel alone cannot withstand them. The others wield swords of ice and call upon sorceries that freeze the blood." A ripple of tension passed through the gathering. The Targaryen prince, standing near the front, cleared his throat. He had silver-blonde hair cropped short, a regal bearing that showed faint echoes of the dragon lords of old Valyria. "My father has heeded these warnings," Prince Burin said. "He sent me north to learn the truth of this threat. If these White Walkers do indeed stir, the crown will not abandon the realm to darkness. But we must know, how can we hope to defeat them if steel fails?" Leaf's attention shifted to him. In the ancient days, dragonglass, obsidian, was proven a potent weapon against the others. Flames, too, can harm them. And yet, they hold cunning beyond the knowledge of men. They have ways to twist your own dead against you, raising corpses to fight under their command. This is why we must strike first, sever their hold on the mortal realm while we can. We must lay wards across the wall. A maester from House Tyrell ventured a question in a wary tone. How exactly do we do this? No disrespect intended, but what sort of magic would men have to perform? All eyes turned to Leaf, who paused as though measuring how much of these secrets to reveal. We children will guide your sorcerers, your priests, your learned men. We will teach the wards to those who can learn, though the process is not simple. Nor is it entirely safe. But we must do it lest the cold swallow us all. Within the circle of onlookers, the watchers in bronze armor stood silent, sentinel-like. Closer at hand, the leading lords and envoys cast uncertain glances at one another. Magic was not a thing many men in Westeros treated lightly. Faith in the Seven, or even in the old gods, did not always extend to welcoming strange, ancient spells. Yet the magnitude of the threat shook them. Lord Tybalt Lannister, hair gone to silver and gold, spoke in a voice that carried natural authority. We Lannisters have no love for wizards or hedge magicians. But these tidings are grave indeed, and we are not blind to our duty to the realm. If magic is required to keep these White Walkers at bay, we will support it, so long as it is truly under control. His emphasis on control did not go unnoticed. Leaf inclined their head but said nothing. Lord Roderick Stark, standing off to the side, let the visitors wrestle with the reality that the children's arrival had dropped in their laps. He had read the letters these lords and ladies sent in advance, riddled with caution or suspicion. Yet seeing the children face to face had clearly shaken them from denial. Roderick took the measure of their willingness and found it sufficient. That evening, the lords convened in Winterfell's great hall, warmed by massive hearths. The children did not linger long in that enclosed space, preferring to step outside or remain near the godwood. But Moss, one of Leaf's companions, returned to guide them through the beginnings of the wards. A hush descended as Moss revealed that the greatest power in weaving such spells lay not in words alone, but in a synergy between living energy, be it from the land, the trees, or even the blood of those who invoked the magic. Men in that hall shifted uneasily when Moss spoke of blood. But they listened, for they had no alternative. For days and then weeks, the alliance began to form. Letters coursed back and forth between Winterfell and King's Landing, between Winterfell and the other seats of power. Armies began to gather in the north at Roderick's urging. Warships from the Iron Islands, pragmatic in the face of a threat that might hamper their raiding if all life were extinguished, arrived at White Harbor. In an unprecedented display, proud men and women from across the Seven Kingdoms rallied together, albeit with uncertainty and suspicion. Scouts brought further grim confirmations. Scattered parties of wildlings reported glimpses of pale riders on dead horses, the ice-rimed silhouettes glimpsed through swirling snow. Occasional half-dead ravens fluttered over the wall, carrying no messages but bearing the stench of cold magic. Deep in the night, some men claimed they heard whites prowling near deserted villages in the far north, their eyes shining with a blue glow under the moon. The tension in Winterfell's yard was near palpable. Swords were sharpened. Dragons, though not many remained in Westeros by this time, were rumored to exist in small numbers at the Targaryen seat of Dragonstone. Yet none had soared overhead in many a year, leaving the question whether the Crown's famed fire-breathing beasts would come to the realm's defense. Even Prince Byrne was not entirely sure. It was said that the children of the forest possessed a magic that could mirror the power of dragonfire, if only in fleeting bursts harnessed through the runes carved into obsidian. To that end, they instructed blacksmiths from the Crownlands, the Westerlands, and the north to shape obsidian arrowheads and spear points in large quantity. The forges glowed day and night, sweat streaming down the smith's brows. Soldiers tested these new weapons in practice hunts, discovering that they required delicacy for OBS. Idian could shatter if mishandled, and yet just a shard of that black glass could prove lethal to the others if aimed true. Lord Roderick oversaw the logistics with the stoic determination of a Stark. He worked closely with his children, Lysara, his eldest daughter and steward, and Miles, his stalwart second-born son who commanded a portion of the forces. Others in the hall contributed their expertise. Prince Byrne tried his hand at forging alliances between the proud houses. He strove to ease tensions with House Lannister, to keep House Baratheon's short temper in check, and to flatter the Tyrell envoys who demanded recognition for the grain they provided. One crisp morning, a courier brought word that the Night's Watch had encountered a White Walker in a skirmish near the Fist of the First Men. Half the patrol was lost, and the survivors barely escaped. They recounted a warrior of glacial beauty and inhuman strength, leading a silent host of dead men. This was the final push needed to galvanize the alliance into action. The decision was made to march north of the wall in force, side by side with the children. If the White Walkers were truly gathering in the frozen wastes, better to meet them there rather than wait for them to gain unstoppable strength. And so, a sprawling army assembled at the wall, an alliance of Northmen, Riverlords, soldiers of the West, Crownlanders, Knights of the Vale, Stormlanders, Reachmen, and even a contingent of Ironborn Reavers who had set aside their customary squabbles to face this existential threat. Along the ramparts of Castle Black, torches flickered, revealing an unprecedented sight, thousands of campfires in the courtyards and beyond the walls. Soldiers huddled, stamping their feet against the cold. The Black Brothers of the Night's Watch looked on, uncertain how to accommodate so many guests, though Lord Commander Ronald Marsh had thrown open their stores and bunkhouses. The scale of it all was unlike anything in living memory. It was here that the children of the forest made their second overture, weaving wards along the mighty length of the wall. They arranged themselves near the base, at intervals, beneath the looming edifice of ice and stone. With them stood a handful of chosen men and women from among the 7 kingdoms, maesters, red priests from the east, who had come after hearing strange tidings, even hedge wizards or wise women rumored to have the gift of green sight. In a hush that fell across the watching armies, the children sang in a low, haunting melody. Their voices intertwined, floating up toward the frigid sky. They traced runes in the air, leaving faint greenish trails of light that shimmered before fading. A hush seemed to pulse outward from them as if the wind itself bowed to that ancient magic. The men and women assisting them bled a few drops of their own blood onto the ice at intervals, pressing their palms there. Moss explained this was a sacrifice to bind the wall to living hearts, renewing the power that would keep the dead from crossing. Some soldiers flinched at the sight, uneasy with blood sorcery, but none dared object too loudly. The threat of the White Walkers weighed heavier on their hearts than squeamishness. Night fell, and still the singing continued. Auroras shimmered across the northern horizon, casting rippling bands of green and purple light over the army. It was said the gods themselves bore witness to the forging of this alliance. As the final chord of that uncanny song faded into the still air, Leaf raised slender arms in a gesture of benediction. The wards are renewed, Leaf declared. The walkers cannot pass this place easily. If they try, they will find themselves weakened. But the wards alone will not stop them if their power grows great. We must meet them beyond the wall and do what must be done, for if we wait, they will gather an army of wights that can hammer at these wards until they shatter. Thus began the march. Thousands of men tramped through the heavy gates of Castle Black, onto the land beyond the wall, into terrain as inhospitable as any in the known world. The children of the forest spread out in small groups among the vanguard, middle, and rear of the host, guiding them through paths that avoided some of the worst ravines and ice-crusted bogs. The wind cut through wool and leather as if it hungered for mortal warmth. Yet onward they marched irresolute, for returning south without confronting the threat was not an option. As the days passed, the nights grew longer, the sun paler. Snow fell so heavily at times that men could scarcely see the next banner down the line. Wolves howled in the distance, though some claimed the howls were something else, something dead. Commander Marsh, who rode alongside Lord Roderick and Prince Burin, kept a tense posture, scanning the horizon. Patrols fanned out on either flank, searching for any sign of the enemy. Then, on a day half-shrouded by a leaden sky, the first real confrontation occurred. They were near a frozen lake surrounded by spindly trees, their branches barren and speckled with frost. Scouts came racing back, wild-eyed, breath billowing in white plumes to warn of movement. A chill hush swept the lines of soldiers. The horns of the vanguard blared, summoning the host to battle formations. It began as a white blur in the swirling snow. From the gloom emerged figures that should have been men but were not. Their eyes gleamed an eerie blue and their flesh was gray with the pallor of death. They wore bits of rusted armor or tattered furs, some bearing battered shields. Leading them were shapes on skeletal horses, the hooves making no sound, their riders encased in ice-like armor. Their eyes burned with glacial malice, the White Walkers. A collective shudder passed through the living host. Even those who did not know the stories recognized an unholy presence. Horses whinnied, stamping in panic. Lords and knights, stoic though they tried to be, felt their hearts pound. But they did not break. Prince Burin urged his mount forward, drawing a sword that glimmered with fresh-forged Valyrian steel. Lysara Stark, at the head of a northern contingent, gripped an obsidian-tipped spear. Others readied flame-touched arrows and torches. In the swirling snow, the others slowly advanced. No war cries, no commands. Only a silence that pressed on the mind like a physical weight. Then, when they were near enough that one could see the shifting of their icy armor, they attacked. Wights lunged forward, rattling in human shrieks issuing from rotted throats. The clang of steel against frozen flesh reverberated across the ice. Some men gagged at the stench of death, but they held firm. Swords found their marks in decaying torsos. Yet for each wight that fell, 2 more scrambled forward, driven by the silent will of their White Walker masters. Obsidian-tip arrows flashed through the air, burying themselves in undead flesh. Some shattered on thick bone. Others struck true, dropping wights instantly. The Watchers in bronze armor, the Children's Guardians, fought with uncanny speed, plunging their obsidian spears into the heart of each wight they faced. Then a White Walker glided in, so swift it seemed to blur. It brandished a sword of glimmering ice. A northern knight rushed forward with a steel blade, only for that steel to splinter like glass on impact. The Walker's sword whistled through the air, taking the knight's head in a single blow. The men near him roared with horror and rage, thrusting flaming torches and dragaglass daggers toward the creature. The Walker darted back, letting its white surge forward to shield it. Elsewhere, Prince Burin collided with another Walker. He carried a Valyrian steel blade black flame, an heirloom of House Targaryen. Their swords met in a shower of frost and sparks. The Walker's hollow visage betrayed a faint curiosity at the metal that did not shatter. But then it pressed forward, the force of its strike sending shock waves up Burin's arm. He grit his teeth and parried, pivoting his mount in an effort to flank the creature. Its cold eyes never left him. Blow after blow rang out, and each time the prince's blade held. The White Walker let out a thin hiss, the first sound it had made, then stepped in with preternatural speed. Only Burin's reflexes, honed by hours of training, prevented a lethal strike. He caught the blade on their weapons locked in a shimmering clash. Across the icy battlefield, the children of the forest knelt in clusters, whispering incantations. Runes carved into the ground glowed faintly, and vines beneath the snow quivered with awakened life. Roots shot up from the frozen earth, tangling around the shambling wights, dragging them down. Some wights hacked themselves free with rusted weapons, but many fell to the ground, pinned and helpless, where northern archers picked them off with dragaglass arrows. It was a savage engagement. Screams punctured the wind, men and wights alike fell in the blood-slick snow. Yet the living had come prepared, armed with knowledge and weapons gleaned from the children. After what felt like an unending storm of violence, the White Walkers seemed to register that they were not facing an unprepared rabble. One hissed a command in a language of creaking ice. The wights near it halted, turning in unison as if responding to a single mind. At once, the others began to withdraw, silent as before, leaving a field strewn with broken corpses that no longer moved. The living forces stood panting and trembling in the aftermath. Some men roared victory to steady their nerves, while others sank to their knees, grateful simply to have survived. Prince Burin managed to deal a glancing blow to his foe at the last moment, the Valyrian steel biting into the Walker's side. It retreated with a soundless snarl, leaving fragments of icy armor behind. Then it too vanished into the swirling white. As the living gathered themselves, the children moved through the battlefield, occasionally stooping to touch the bodies with spindly hands. They murmured words of release, ensuring no spark of necromantic force remained. In the days that followed, the allied host advanced further north, buoyed by the knowledge that they had met the White Walkers and not been annihilated. Still, the cost was sobering. Many men had died, many more were injured. Those who had faced a Walker directly bore new scars, physical and otherwise. The marches continued through ever more treacherous terrain, guided by the children's uncanny sense of direction and the knowledge gleaned from old runic maps. The plan, as best as the mortal minds could fathom, was to push toward the heart of the White Walker's domain, where the cold was said to be so profound that even ravens froze mid-flight. If they could strike a crippling blow at the source, whatever it might be, they might drive them into slumber again or perhaps destroy them outright. Yet the White Walkers did not idly stand by. They struck again and again, in smaller skirmishes, testing the Allies' defenses, wearing them down slowly. Each engagement came with a bitter cost. Men who fell could be turned if their bodies were left behind, swelling the ranks of the dead. The living soon learned to burn their dead swiftly, building pyres that sent smoke curling into the wintry sky. One night, after a particularly brutal ambush, the lords and leading children of the forest convened in a circle of tents lit by flickering lanterns. Canvas walls rippled in the fierce wind, while outside, sentries stood vigilant. Lord Roderick Stark, lines of fatigue etched into his face, spoke first. "We cannot simply continue forward without a plan. Every day we lose more men. The storms grow worse. If we press on, we might be walking into a trap." Prince Burin frowned, glancing at a rough map pinned to a table. But turning back means leaving the White Walkers time to gather. The wards on the wall may be renewed, but they are not unbreakable. Sooner or later, the others will muster a force strong enough to shatter them. If we leave now, all of this will be for nothing." A hush fell as everyone looked to Leaf, Moss, and Ember. The three children exchanged glances as though communicating silently. Finally, Leaf spoke. "The heart of their power is near a place men call the Frozen Vale beyond the Shivering Sea's far coastline. We sense a rift in the energies there. If we can perform a great working, a ritual to sever their connection to the living realm, then we may banish them. But to do so, we must reach the place, and we must hold the White Walkers at bay long enough for us to complete the ritual." "How long would that take?" asked Lord Tybalt Lannister, arms crossed, the gold lion on his cloak dusted with frost. "A full night, from dusk till dawn," answered Leaf. "We will need watchers, guardians, fires kept lit. The White Walkers will sense what we attempt. They will do all they can to stop it." A heavy silence followed. The notion of spending an entire night fending off an army of the dead while the children performed arcane rites chilled them more than any winter wind. But they had come too far, fought too hard to shy away now. Roderick nodded slowly. "We will do it." The houses did not band together only to shrink from the final challenge. "Let us plan our approach carefully. We choose a defensible location. We'll set up ringed fortifications, build fires, lots of fires, and place archers around the perimeter. Our best swordsmen will be ready to meet the White Walkers face to face. And the children shall have the space they need for this ritual." They hammered out the details under that swaying tent. Scouts would sweep the route ahead, searching for a suitable site near the rumored Frozen Vale. Once it was found, the main host would march steadily, preserving strength for the final stand. Rations were counted, medical supplies allocated. The Red Priests among them spoke of summoning the Lord of Light's fire, while the Maesters insisted on practicality, reminding them how quickly frostbite could claim exposed skin. At last, with the plan more or less decided, the leaders took their rest, some more fitful than others. The next morning, they resumed their march into the teeth of the frigid north. A grim determination settled over the allied host as they navigated icebound gorges and plains of endless snow. The air was so cold that even talking risked freezing one's lips. Horses fared poorly, but they pushed on, spurred by their riders' sense of urgency. The children remained oddly serene, drifting over snowdrifts as though weightless. Scouts eventually located a craggy plateau ringed by steep ridges, perhaps a day's march from the rumored Frozen Vale. It was defensible on three sides, with only one major approach. A series of rocky outcroppings would shield them from direct assault, and a shallow cave system could provide shelter for supplies. It was here that the Alliance made their stand. They constructed crude ramparts of ice blocks and sharpened stakes around the most vulnerable perimeter. Fires were lit, forming a ring of torches and braziers, fed by any available wood, even broken wagons when fuel ran low. The children wove runic designs across the ground, using ground-up obsidian mixed with their own forms of ink. The Red Priests scrawled flame symbols and prayed in fervent whispers, proclaiming that the true enemy was darkness, and that fire would guide them. As dusk crept across that silent tundra, tension rippled in the ranks. Men stood in formations behind the ramparts, clutching weapons that shimmered with frost. Women too, for many had chosen to fight. Some from the northern houses, some from the free folk, who had joined the host in smaller numbers, led by their own chieftains. Above, the sky bled into a bruised purple, the sun's dying light painting the snow in a surreal hue. Within the ring of torches, the children assembled around a small, leafless weirwood sapling they had carried with them. Its bark was white as bone, though its branches were only slender rods. They placed it in the ground, chanting softly. Then they called for quiet. The combined leaders, Lord Roderick, Prince Burin, Lord Tybalt, the Tully and Tyrell representatives, the Baratheon envoy, and others, stood guard around them, forming the innermost protective circle. In the hush, Leaf placed both hands on the weirwood sapling. Moss and Ember knelt on either side, pressing palms to the soil. They began to sing, but this was no gentle melody. It was deeper, resonant, thrumming with an undercurrent of power that felt as though it rose from the very bones of the earth. The runes etched in obsidian dust about them began to glow faintly green. Minute by minute, as the last sliver of sun vanished beyond the horizon, the children's singing wove higher, reaching a pitch that reverberated through every nerve. The wind itself seemed to quiver in response. Soldiers clutched their arms to steady themselves against the strange sensations coursing through the air. Then, in a moment between breaths, the White Walkers came. They emerged from the gathering darkness like wraiths, their pale forms blending almost seamlessly with the snow. The watchers on the ramparts sounded the alarm. Horns blared, voices shouted, and obsidian-tipped arrows flew. From behind the barricades, lines of archers loosed volley after volley of dragon-glass shafts. Some found their mark, felling wights or even glancing off the armor of a White Walker. Others were lost in the swirling gloom. The White Walkers advanced methodically, controlling the undead that stumbled forward in droves. Each time a wight fell, it seemed two more rose. The army of the dead was staggering in its numbers, men, women, and beasts that had long since perished, now pressed into service by that unholy frost. At once, the defenders clashed against the wave of corpses, shouting battle cries half lost in the shrieks of the wind. Torches and braziers lit the night with dancing flame, a fragile circle of light amid the infinite cold. The stench of decay was overpowering, but the living stood firm. Prince Burin's Valyrian steel sword cut down one wight after another, burning them with a cold hiss of steam. Lord Roderick Stark, far from a young man, nonetheless held his ground with a longsword that had an obsidian edge hammered into its fuller. Around them, the Watchers in bronze armor fought with the same lethal grace they had displayed before, weaving among the living to strike with horrifying precision. The White Walkers themselves waited, half seen in the swirling dark, letting their wights grind down the defenders. Then, as if responding to a silent cue, they darted forward, ice swords gleaming. One of them struck a rampart, shattering half its wooden stakes with inhuman strength. Soldiers rushed to meet it, only to have their blades turned to shards by that frosty sword. A hedge knight from the Riverlands, wearing the Trout sigil on a battered shield, lunged with a dragonglass spear. The White Walker sidestepped and shattered the spear. It ran the knight through, leaving the body to crumple. But a second knight took advantage of the distraction, hurling a bottle of wildfire that had been prepared at great cost. The glass shattered at the walker's feet, erupting in green flame. The thing hissed, recoiling as unnatural flames licked at its icy form. Arrows rained down, and a single dragonglass arrow found its chest. The White Walker collapsed in a swirl of crackling frost. The Watchers gave a ragged cheer. Elsewhere around the perimeter, more White Walkers pressed in. Wights clambered over the dead, reaching with grasping fingers. The defenders fought desperately, mindful that each moment they held the line was a moment the children of the forest could continue their ritual. Inside the ring of torches, Leaf and their companions remained locked in song, eyes half closed. The weirwood sapling glowed from within, its bark reflecting the swirling green light of the runes in the snow. The chanting grew louder, more urgent. Occasionally, ember or moss gasped in pain as if seized by some invisible force. But they did not falter. The magic weaving through the air began to coil into a whirlwind of power. Tendrils of living energy, visible only as faint distortions, spiraled upward. The Watchers who were closest swore they could see shadowy silhouettes within that vortex, faces long dead, or perhaps spirits that had walked this land before men. Yet the White Walkers would not allow the ritual to complete unchallenged. 3 of their number broke through the lines, gliding across the snow with unnatural speed. They were heading straight for the ritual circle. Prince Burin, Lysara Stark, and a knot of Watchers in bronze armor stood in their path. The first Walker swung its icy blade at the prince, who caught it on black lame. Sparks of frost lit the night as they clashed again and again in a deadly dance. Lysara lunged at the second Walker, brandishing her dragonglass spear. It met her blow with a graceful parry, the impact numbing her arms. She barely managed to twist away from its return strike, which carved a line across her shoulder. Even through steel and leather, the cold seared her flesh like frostbite. She staggered, seeing her own breath crystallize. A bronze-armored guardian engaged the third Walker, spear spinning in an arc that hummed through the air. The White Walker batted it aside, then ran the guardian through with its ice sword. The being shuddered, dark blood seeping through the bronze plates, yet it managed to thrust its spear upward, impaling the Walker in the throat. Both collapsed, locked in a lethal embrace, dissolving into drifting ice crystals and a lifeless husk. Meanwhile, the second Walker knocked Lysara to the ground with a savage backhand. Her spear clattered away. It raised its sword, aiming for a killing blow. She clenched her eyes, bracing for the cold slash. But at that moment, an arrow of dragonglass whistled through the air. It struck the Walker's temple, piercing the ice helm. With a hiss that rattled like breaking ice, the creature disintegrated. Lysara looked behind her and saw Miles Stark lowering his bow, face grim with determination. Prince Burin still struggled with the first Walker in a flurry of steel and ice. Each strike felt like a hammer blow on his arms. Yet he harnessed every ounce of skill and will, remembering the countless hours spent with master-at-arms and tutors in King's Landing. He gave ground, baiting the walker to overextend. At last, it lunged, and he pivoted, slicing with black flame in a perfect arc. The blade bit deep into the walker's torso, sending a spiderweb of cracks across its body. With a harsh exhalation of freezing mist, it dissolved into shards of frost that tinkled on the bloody snow. Burin fell to one knee, chest heaving, as if he had just sprinted miles. Amid these deadly struggles, the children's song reached a crescendo. The weirwood sapling flared with a blinding green-white radiance, casting elongated shadows that twisted madly over the snow. A pillar of shimmering energy arced into the sky, momentarily dispersing the thick clouds overhead, revealing a tapestry of bright, cold stars. The white walkers around the battlefield recoiled. Some tried to press forward, but their whites faltered, heads lolling, as if their guiding force were fraying. The watchers in bronze armor took advantage, plunging obsidian spears into confused whites. Soldiers let out battle cries, hacking the undead to pieces and tossing torches on the severed remains. Then came a sound like a thunderclap. The energies swirling in the sky above the sapling pulsed outward in a shockwave. It rippled across the ranks of the dead, dissolving scores of whites instantly. Further out, white walkers shuddered, their forms cracking. Many collapsed into snow and ice. Some managed to retreat, staggering, as though a vital link had been severed. For a moment, everything was blinded by that flash of green-white power. Men cried out, shielding their eyes. The wind roared, as though a gale blew from every direction at once. Then, as suddenly as it began, the glow subsided, sinking into the earth with a final ghostly hum. Silence followed. The defenders stood among piles of unmoving corpses, battered barricades, and fields churned by battle. Torches sputtered, revealing a scene of carnage and heartbreak. Yet the White Walkers no longer pressed forward. Their white army was shattered or destroyed. In the distance, any survivors limped away, stumbling across the tundra. When the living dared to hope it was over, they found the children of the forest still kneeling around the sapling. The ritual had drained them. Leaf, moss, and ember seemed diminished, their delicate bodies trembling, eyes distant. The watchers in bronze armor, those who still stood, rushed to their side, offering silent aid. Gradually, men and women realized they had done what so few ever dreamed possible. They had confronted the White Walkers in open battle and broken them. The sense of wonder and disbelief spread in hushed murmurs. Fires crackled, the tang of smoke filling the air. Some men cheered wildly, others sank to the ground, hugging comrades or weeping for friends lost. Lord Roderick surveyed the field, his heart heavy even amid victory. So many bodies lay still in the snow, some missing limbs, others with blank eyes staring into the frosty sky. Yet for every fallen friend, there were 5 times as many rotting whites. The stench was overwhelming. He forced himself to remain calm, to marshal the living into action. "Burn the dead," he commanded, voice carrying over the hush. "Our own we shall lay to rest with due honor, but first we must ensure they do not rise again. Build pyres. Gather the wounded. Hurry, this cold will claim them if we do not act swiftly." The allies moved quickly, gathering wood, piling bodies. Pyres lit the battlefield, each pillar of flame piercing the dark. Smoke mingled with the starry sky, now come after the swirling energies of the ritual. The White Walkers were gone, those not destroyed had vanished into the wastes, presumably too weak to continue the fight. The wards that had been renewed on the wall and the great working performed by the children seemed to have broken their power for now, possibly for centuries more. And so, the realm was spared a new long night. Though none could say for how long, the threat of the others was beaten back long before they could descend upon Winterfell and the south. News of this incredible victory slowly trickled south, carried by the wounded men who returned or the ravens dispatched from the far north. The realm, still reeling from the memory of what might have been, dared to hope for peace. Prince Burin would become known as the Slayer of Winter, though he humbly deflected such titles, sharing credit with every house, every soldier, and most especially the children of the forest. House Stark earned new prestige for uniting the realm when it mattered most, and Lord Roderick's name would be etched in song for generations as the Stark who bridged the gap between men and the children. The children themselves took little credit. Leaf, Moss, Ember, and the surviving Watchers in bronze armor slipped away in the weeks following the final battle. Some said they melted into the depths of the haunted forest, returning to secret refuges known only to their kind. Others whispered they communed with the green seers beneath ancient weirwood roots, ensuring that the wards woven this time would last for an age. No one was entirely certain, but the lessons remained. The peoples of Westeros had seen firsthand that alliances could overcome ancient terrors. They had witnessed the potency of magic, but also the courage of mortal hearts in the face of unthinkable horrors. A hush of respect and awe lingered in those who stood on the plateau that night and fought beneath the swirling auroras. And so it was that the White Walkers, who might have brought a second long night to the world, found their plans thwarted long before they could sweep south to Winterfell. Men and children of the forest, bound in unity by fear and hope, had renewed the old wards and carried the fight to the stronghold of winter itself. Thus the realm was spared, at least for a time, from the unstoppable march of the undead. The ghostly echoes of that battle would remain etched upon the northern snows and the hearts of men forever. When the spring eventually came, it did so tentatively. The north was still cloaked in ice, but the days grew longer, the nights less merciless. The realm turned its gaze back to the more mundane matters of intrigue, trade, and inheritance. But in the quiet corners of halls and hearths, people remembered how close they had come to oblivion. Children grew up hearing fresh tales of the day men stood with the children of the forest, of the Watchers in bronze who fought side by side with knights and lords. From that day forward, a new tradition took hold in Winterfell. Each year, on the date said to mark the final battle, the people lit small lanterns of glass filled with candles tinted green, a color reminiscent of that final flash of magic. They placed them in windows and along the parapets, a silent homage to the alliance that saved them. And though the children were no longer seen openly in the courtyard, it was said that if one listened closely at twilight, one might still hear the echo of a distant, haunting melody, reminding men that they did not stand alone, so long as they remembered and honored what had been forged on that fateful night. Years later, travelers who ventured north of the wall spoke in hushed tones of eerie silence in the once dead lands. They found no sign of roving whites or pale riders, only the wind sweeping across empty plains of ice. Now and then, they swore they saw footprints that were not quite human, trailing off into the horizon. Perhaps the children still walked there, tending wards that kept the others in slumber. Perhaps the White Walkers lingered in the darkest corners, nursing their wounds and biding their time. But for the moment, the dead did not march and the living breathed free. And so, in this turning of fate, the realm discovered that the grandest alliances are sometimes born of necessity and fear, but they can blossom into hope as well. The great houses, once divided by age-old grudges and conflicts, had learned unity in the face of true extinction. The children of the forest, once hidden and wary, had stepped forward to shield the land they once shared, forging a bond that spanned ages, crossing the boundary between legend and mortal truth. Generations hence, maesters would record this chapter in their annals. How the king in the south and the lords of the north, with the guidance of being so ancient they seemed part of the land itself, stood as one to halt the march of the undead. Songs would be composed by bards who spoke of the swirling auroras, the ring of torches amid the endless snow, and the heroic last stand on the frozen plateau that turned the tide. The memory would endure, and while men might forget details or embroider them beyond recognition, they would not forget the essence. That, for one crucial winter, the children and the great houses shared a single purpose, vanquishing the long night before it truly began. In candlelit halls, men and women still tell their children. The wall stands, and beyond it lies the land of ice, quiet and watchful. But do not forget the living flame that once burned there, the alliances forged under the dancing lights. We do not stand alone in this world. And if the cold should ever stir again, if the White Walkers dare rise anew, men and children will rise to meet them. For we have done it before. And so their words echo, joined by the wind that sighs through Winterfell's ancient towers, through the weirwood branches in the Godwood, through the shining spires of King's Landing, and over the wide fields of the Reach. A reminder that sometimes, against the looming specter of darkness, the simplest yet strongest defense is the unity of the living, bolstered by the quiet might of those who were here first, who have always heard the heartbeat of the land, and who share that heartbeat with men. Smoke still drifted across the frozen plateau, curling from the last of the pyres as dawn's early light tinted the eastern sky with a faint gray. The wind remained bitter, yet it felt more ordinary now, lacking the malevolent chill that had stalked them for so long. Men and women moved among the ashes, some kneeling in silent grief by the heaps of burned remains. Others crouched around small braziers, absorbing what little warmth they could coax from the embers. Despite the staggering cost in lives, a sense of calm, almost relief, pulsed through the survivors. They had faced the White Walkers, the others, and prevailed. Lord Roderick Stark stood on a slight rise, gazing down at the aftermath of the battle. His fur-lined cloak bore new rents, stained dark with blood, though whether it was his own or someone else's he could not say. The lines in his face seemed deeper than ever, and the streaks of silver in his hair shone stark in the morning light. At his side stood his daughter Lysara and his son Miles. Both were bloodied and exhausted. Lysara held her wounded shoulder gingerly, fresh bandages wrapped the area where the White Walker's ice sword had grazed her. Miles's bow still hung across his back, but he looked as if he might collapse if he allowed himself to relax for too long. They offered one another weary smiles, too drained for words. In unspoken agreement, they turned their attention to the heart of the camp where the children of the forest remained near the weirwood sapling. The small, leafless trunk had changed overnight. Fine cracks ran along its alabaster bark, shimmering faintly with the vestiges of greenish light. Even so, the trunk still stood upright, and a few tendrils of root had anchored into the frozen ground. Around it, the three surviving children, Leaf, Moss, and Ember, rested with their watchers in bronze. Several watchers now bore grievous injuries, yet they stayed alert, silent as ever, as though formed from living stone. Lord Roderick forced his aching legs to carry him down to where Leaf knelt. He feared the children might vanish at any moment. The memory of how swiftly their kind could slip into the forests or disappear beneath weirwood roots was fresh in his mind. He did not wish them to leave without hearing what they would say in the aftermath. He paused, lowering his voice in respect. Leaf. He inclined his head. You and your people, you have saved us all. We owe you a debt beyond measure. Will you remain in Westeros now that the threat is vanquished? Or will you return to the deeper places of the world? Leaf opened their eyes, which glowed faintly in the half-light. In their expression was something akin to sorrow, but also a quiet resolve. Men and children have fulfilled an ancient pact, Leaf said softly. Their voice was even more delicate than before, as though the ritual had taken a toll upon their spirit. We have staved off the long night. For now. But our time among you must be brief. We go where the forests call us, where the old energies endure. The wards we have raised will hold so long as men do not forget. So long as you burn your dead and remember the songs to keep darkness at bay. Lord Roderick glanced from Leaf to the others. I understand. Still, we hope that this alliance might endure in some form. If ever the White Walkers rise again. They will, Leaf said gently, though not unkindly. In some distant day, when centuries have passed and new kings sit on old thrones. The cold does not die forever. It sleeps, it waits. We cannot wholly banish it. That is the truth of the world, that darkness and light ebb and flow, locked in a cycle that spans ages. Roderick exhaled a frosty breath. Then we must remain vigilant. He studied the battered watchers in bronze, whose gaze swept warily across the churned battlefield. Will your guards travel with you, or might they stay to help maintain the wards on the wall? Leaf considered a moment. Some watchers may choose to remain near the wall's wards as guardians unseen. But we will not walk openly in men's halls. That time has not come, nor may it ever come again. Our strength does not lie in your roads or your stone keeps. We belong to the forests, to the deep places where the roots of magic grow. Roderick nodded, though a pang of regret coiled in his chest. The alliance that had saved the realm would soon become part of stories and songs. In time, people might doubt it ever truly happened, just as so many had doubted the existence of White Walkers or the children's presence in bygone ages. Nonetheless, he accepted it. We are grateful, he said simply. One of the watchers broke away from the group, stepping forward to present Roderick with a slender spear whose haft was woven from pale weirwood fibers. The tip was dragon glass, etched with runic markings that glimmered in the morning light. The watcher bowed as if entrusting him with a sacred gift. Roderick took the spear, overcome by a sense of awe and responsibility. Ember, who had risen to stand beside Leaf, inclined their head. A token of our bond, they said, voice hushed. Should the night grow dark once more, may that spear remind men to look north, to remember what the wall stands for, and to call upon the ancient pacts. Roderick gripped the spear. I will keep it safe and pass it to my heirs. By then, other leading figures of the alliance had begun to gather. Prince Buren Targaryen, hair bound in a silver-white tail behind his neck, approached with caution. He wore no crown, for he was merely a royal envoy, but a hush followed him just the same. Drying blood flecked his armor, and his cheeks were hollow with fatigue. He inclined his head to the children. "Your help has given Westeros a reprieve from darkness," he said, voice steady. "It shall not be forgotten in King's Landing." Leaf offered him a faint, enigmatic smile. "We hope that is true," they murmured. Words vanish, but memory in Weirwood endures. Prince Buren glanced at the sapling in the ground. The children had not yet uprooted it, though the cracks in its bark suggested it had been profoundly changed by the magic channeling. "Will that tree survive here, in this blighted soil?" he asked gently. "It will," Moss said, lifting their gaze. "Though stunted. It may not grow tall, but it will serve as a node of power, anchoring the wards we called forth. It belongs to this land now, and if men leave it unharmed, it will stand as sentinel to watch the slumbering north." Those words inspired a sense of reverence in Prince Buren. He too felt that intangible hush, a presence that seemed to linger around the tiny Weirwood. Perhaps some scrap of the old gods or the energies that the children wielded had seeped into its pale trunk. The idea made him swallow, uncertain. Valyrian tradition and the faith of the Seven were his birthright, but in this moment he sensed a greater tapestry of powers beyond any single creed. More lords drifted in. Lord Tybalt Lannister, leaning on the arm of a bannerman, eyed the children with suspicion that even now he could not fully hide. Yet he did not speak ill of them. Perhaps the sight of White Walkers disintegrating in the final blast of that ritual had forever erased his doubt about old magics. Lord Tully's second-born son, Brian, was there as well, face drawn from sleeplessness. Beside them stood the Stormlander envoy from House Baratheon, Ser Harold, broad-shouldered and grim, and a half-dozen others, each representing different corners of Westeros. After a measured pause, Lord Tybalt dipped his head. "We owe you our thanks," he said, though his tone was somewhat stiff. "Though I confess I do not relish that such power lies with—" He caught himself, pressed his lips together, then finished the sentence more diplomatically. "With forces beyond our understanding. Still, you have our gratitude, and that is a rare gift from House Lannister." Leaf inclined their head in return, unoffended by the Lannisters' caution. "We do not seek dominion over men. We only guard against the darkness that does not stop at your walls. The long night would devour us all." At that, Lord Tybalt fell silent, content to let any further misgivings remain unvoiced. The Stormlander envoy gave a curt nod. "I fought in the thick of that battle," Ser Harold said, "and I'll stand in any hall from Storm's End to King's Landing, telling all who will hear that I saw a White Walker with my own eyes. They will believe me or they will label me a fool, but no matter. I know the truth." "Good," replied Leaf. "Never forget." The conversation circled for a few moments more until Leaf at last rose, signaled to the watchers, and turned back to the Weirwood sapling. There, Leaf, Moss, and Ember closed their eyes, whispering in a language older than the tongues of men. A shiver went through the watchers, and each placed a hand upon the bark. For a heartbeat, the sapling's cracks seemed to glow anew. Then the glow vanished, and the watchers stepped back. "We leave you now," Leaf said quietly. "We must tend the forests, heal what can be healed. The wards on your wall are strong, but not unbreakable. If ever they falter, look to the old gods and the Weirwoods. Look north, where the memory of our alliance remains. Hold fast to your unity, for that is your truest defense." One by one, the children turned away. They drifted through the remains of the battlefield, weaving past the pyres and the living. A few watchers hovered to assist them, carrying any who seemed too weakened to continue on their own. Most men and women gave way without a word. Though the watchers were small in stature compared to a knight in steel armor, they moved with an air of unearthly power, and none who saw them doubted the dangers they could still unleash. By the time the sun rose fully over the horizon, the children of the forest were gone. Some said they vanished into the storm-lashed crags in the north, others that they sank into hidden caverns far below the snow. A small handful might have lingered in the edges of the haunted forest, gleaning seeds and secrets from the Weirwoods there. No one could say for sure. Only the pale sapling remained, anchored in the heart of that plateau ringed by makeshift ramparts and burnt remains. The watchers in bronze had departed as well, except for a single individual who knelt by a fallen companion's remains as if lost in silent mourning. Then that watcher, too, rose and left, following the tracks the others had made. In the end, the children left behind only footprints in the snow, the gifts of renewed wards, and the memory of how close Westeros had come to annihilation. Over the next days, the allied host began to break camp. A measure of caution prevailed, for none wished to be ambushed by any straggling White Walkers. Yet no sign of the undead appeared. As if a veil had lifted, the domain beyond the wall felt empty of that crawling dread that had followed them. Winter's cold remained, but lacking the supernatural edge it once held. Scouts surveyed the land for miles around and found nothing but wind-blown snowdrifts and ancient bones that did not stir. The greatest concern lay in bringing the wounded back safely. Many men had lost fingers or toes to frostbite, and many more had ugly wounds from the battle. Some suffered from a lingering chill in their bones that not even fire could fully banish. Maesters traveled among them, applying poultices where they could, sewing ragged cuts with numb fingers. Men from the free folk who had joined the fight offered knowledge of local herbs that might ease the pain. They had lost many of their own, yet the stories told around the nightly fires rang with a strange, grim pride. Tormak Snowbeard boasted of stabbing a white in the eye, while Hilga the huntress swore she'd sent 2 white walkers reeling with her flaming arrows. It was a moment of unity few would have thought possible even months before. The southern lords, who had never expected to travel so far from the comforts of their keeps, yearned to return home. Yet a sense of duty demanded they remain until certain that the threat was truly ended. Prince Burin, for his part, wrote careful missives to King's Landing, describing the horrors they faced and the victory they achieved. Ravens departed from the battered rookery the Alliance had improvised, though many birds were lost in the fierce northern winds. At last, with a final round of scouting completed and no sign of a renewed threat, the Allied forces withdrew. They moved back toward the wall in a long, straggling column of riders, foot soldiers, and wagons carrying the wounded. Some small contingents stayed behind to search for scattered pockets of wildlings, offering them a chance of truce or safe passage. Many had fled deeper into the wilds before the battle. They might now return, uncertain, to find that the supernatural menace had been halted. Even so, the Watchers of the Night's Watch, under Lord Commander Ronald Marsh, prepared to keep a keener eye than ever. The Black Brothers had witnessed horrors they would not soon forget. Crossing through Castle Black, the men found the fortress more crowded than it had ever been, for hundreds of new arrivals milled about waiting for orders or shelter. Some were the wounded who had managed to limp back, others simply worn out from weeks of punishing cold. Northmen and Southerners rubbed elbows in the courtyard. The atmosphere was uneasy, for the Night's Watch prided itself on neutrality, yet they were forced into a caretaker role with all these armed lords in black stone halls. Fights flared occasionally, usually over trifling matters: food rations, sleeping space, a heated word among rivals who had once warred in the south. But each brawl subsided quickly. The threat they had faced overshadowed any petty quarrel. Prince Burin and Lord Roderick Stark worked together to keep the peace. Though Roderick was not a flamboyant man, he carried authority in his quiet voice. Burin, for his part, found that many men now respected him greatly. The story of how he clashed swords with a White Walker, wielding Valyrian steel without flinching, had spread through the camp. Men who had once written him off as an untested royal youth now considered him a hero, or at least someone worth hearing. They listened when he told them to stand down and wait for better days. The day after they arrived at Castle Black, a gathering took place in the solar reserved for the Lord Commander, cramped quarters, but it offered enough warmth and privacy for the leaders who had endured the cold for so long. Ronald Marsh, lean and silver-haired, presided from behind a rough-hewn table. Prince Burin, Lord Roderick, Lord Tybalt, Brian Tully, the Stormlander Ser Harold, and a representative of the Tyrells clustered around. Other lesser lords and knights stood behind them, forming a semicircle near the wall. "We should send formal word to every seat of power in Westeros," Prince Burin began. "Word that the crisis is over. The White Walkers are banished, at least for now. Our combined forces proved decisive, and we owe part of that to the children of the forest. This is a moment to unify the realm under a sense of shared triumph." Lord Tybalt folded his arms. Yes, a sense of triumph and the knowledge that whites and White Walkers were real. The small folk must be terrified by the notion that such creatures could appear again. "We must ensure they do not panic." "A measured announcement will suffice," Roderick said. "We can share the gist of what happened, acknowledging the threat we faced and how we overcame it. But perhaps we need not describe the worst horrors. Men will sleep better if they do not imagine armies of living corpses just beyond the horizon." Marsh tapped his fingers on the table. "The Night's Watch has records stretching back centuries, though many are incomplete. We will compile an official account of this campaign to be kept here so future generations may remember. I doubt we can keep the details from spreading anyway. Thousands fought in that final stand. The truth will out." A short, pained laugh came from Ser Harold. "Let us hope the realm has the wisdom to believe it for more than a handful of years. Men are prone to forgetting what they cannot see with their own eyes." Prince Burin exhaled. "You're not wrong." He looked from face to face. "But for the moment, we must not dwell on that. Let's focus on next steps. The lords and knights here need to return home. Winter has not passed, but spring will come sooner or later. The realm must heal. I trust House Stark will watch the north, ensuring the wards on the wall remain strong. Roderick inclined his head. Indeed, that will be our duty. My men will patrol and the Night's Watch will remain vigilant. We have perhaps a generation or more of peace from the others now, though I do not pretend to know all the secrets of the magic that holds them at bay. We can do only what we must, Ronald Marsh agreed. The Watch's oath remains the same. We guard the realms of men. Now we have more reason than ever to stand watch, to send out ranging parties north of the wall, and to maintain alliances with any free folk who remain. At that, the meeting turned to logistical matters: how to feed thousands of troops on the return journey, how to secure safe passage for the wounded, what roads might be blocked by snow. Lord Tybalt pressed to have his western forces move out before the next major storm. Lord Roderick assured him that the King's Road, though winterbound, should still be passable if they traveled in large numbers. The Tyrell representative offered wagons of supplies, for the Reach had been bountiful before the latest cold snap. If they could share provisions, fewer men would starve before reaching the safer climes of the south. At last, the meeting concluded with an understanding that each major house would write or send envoys to proclaim the victory and assure their vassals that the immediate crisis had ended. But none would forget how close that crisis had come to engulfing them. Even the Lannisters, proud as they were, had a newfound caution in their eyes when speaking of magic or the old tales. With that settled, the great exodus began. Column by column, armies departed Castle Black, bearing their banners southward. They traveled in smaller groups than when they first arrived, for the fighting had cost them dearly. Worn-faced soldiers escorted wagons of wounded. Many had limbs in splints or bandages over half-healed frostbite. Yet the spirit of unity still lingered, tempered by sorrow but also by a shared sense of accomplishment. Men who might otherwise have despised one another walked side by side, exchanging quiet words of respect. They had survived a confrontation with an evil out of legend, and that bond was not easily undone. Prince Burin remained at Castle Black for a time. As the realm's official envoy from the crown, he wished to oversee final details, coordinate with the Night's Watch, and perhaps glean knowledge from their ancient records before returning to King's Landing. He also hoped to gather any leftover shards of dragoglass or runes the children had left behind to show to the royal maesters. With Roderick Stark's blessing, he spent days poring over old books in a chilly chamber that served as the Watch's library, seeking references to the First Long Night, the building of the wall, and the early alliances with the children. Meanwhile, the Starks and their bannermen moved back to Winterfell. It was a return fraught with bittersweet emotions. They had been away for many weeks, some for months, and in that time the old castle had grown quiet. Those who had remained behind had taken in refugees fleeing harsh storms, scrounged up grain from distant storehouses, and occasionally heard rumors of the northern host's ordeal. When the banners of the dire wolf appeared on the horizon, the gates opened and tears streamed down the cheeks of those who had feared the worst. Roderick's wife, Lady Alice, greeted him in the courtyard. She tried to maintain her usual composure, but emotion cracked through her reserve when she saw his ragged appearance. They held one another beneath the scattered flurries of snow as stable hands rushed to tend the horses. Lysara and Miles came forward next, stepping into her embrace. She touched Lysara's bandaged shoulder with gentle concern, and Lysara reassured her mother with a wan smile. Even in the swirl of relief, grief remained in the knowledge that many Northmen who had marched forth did not return. Roderick's younger children, who had been too small to go to war, peered from the keep's door, eyes wide. They marveled at the battered armor, the grim expressions of the soldiers who filtered in. Small voices asked if the monsters were truly gone. In gentle tones, Roderick and Lady Alice told them that the monsters had been sent back into the cold. But we must remember, Roderick added quietly, that we stand ever watchful, for the cold is patient. Over the next several days, Winterfell stirred to life with the arrival of more returning warriors. The place grew crowded even with the empty beds that had opened among those who would never come home. Long tables in the great hall were laid out with simple fare: stew, black bread, smoked fish. Ale and wine were served in measured amounts, enough to warm the spirit without leading to reckless celebration. There were toasts in memory of the fallen and hushed recollections of the final battle beyond the wall. In between these communal gatherings, the castle's routines resumed. Maids hauled water to the battered soldiers who needed cleaning and dressing of wounds. The master-at-arms, still stiff from his own injuries, tried to reorganize the garrison. The blacksmith hammered at damaged blades, though obsidian weapons were stored away, treasured relics of the war to come. Each day, a portion of the men parted from Winterfell to travel to their own lands, Carhold, the Dreffort, Deepwood Motte, White Harbor, each carrying the story of what they had seen. Meanwhile, ravens flew south to confirm that the other's threat had been driven back. The realm breathed a collective sigh of relief, though some rumor-mongers spun wild tales of entire armies of White Walkers slaughtered in a single stroke of magic, or of dead dragons that had awakened in the far north. Each retelling grew more fantastical, but the kernel of truth remained. The living had joined forces with the children of the forest, and they had won a great victory that saved the realm from a new long night. In King's Landing, King Aelor Targaryen was said to be both astonished and unsettled by the reports that arrived. His men whispered that he spent hours in the Red Keep's throne room, reading Prince Burin's letters. The accounts told of White Walkers that shattered steel swords and whites that rose en masse to assault the living. They spoke of an alliance with elusive beings out of legend and the forging of wards upon the wall. King Aelor convened his small council, including the Hand of the King, to debate how best to handle the news. Many recommended a grand triumph for the returning soldiers, especially Prince Burin, celebrating him as a hero who had saved the realm. Others advised caution lest the crown appear to rely on ancient magics that might worry or alienate certain powerful factions. In the end, the king struck a balance. He proclaimed an official day of thanks throughout the Crownlands and commended his son for his valor. Messengers carried news to every major holdfast, lauding the role of House Stark, House Tully, House Lannister, House Baratheon, House Tyrell, and all the northern houses that had contributed. The faith of the Seven gave thanks in septs from the Vale to the Arbor, offering prayers that the gods had delivered the realm from the long night. Yet in quiet corners, some maesters and highborn skeptics wondered if the stories had been exaggerated. The children of the forest had come? Truly? And the White Walkers were real? That was the subject of dusty lore, not modern warfare. Still, too many men had witnessed it, and the crown itself acknowledged it. It became a matter of accepted fact, however incredible. Prince Burin finally returned to the capital, flanked by a diminished but proud retinue. Cheering crowds met him in the city, though the common folk stood at a bit of a distance, unnerved by stories of walking corpses and silver-haired princes who dueled demons made of ice. Burin accepted the adulation with humility, repeating that he had merely fought alongside thousands of brave souls and that none of it would have been possible without the unity of the great houses. He especially spoke of House Stark's leadership and the abiding courage of the free folk, who had also done their share. If at times his father, King Aelor, looked uneasy, perhaps suspecting his son's popularity was growing beyond what a cautious king might prefer, he did not openly show it. The realm needed heroes, and Burin had unwittingly become the greatest of them. Across the other kingdoms, smaller celebrations or solemn observances took place. The lords who had participated in the campaign returned as changed men, their families and vassals noticing the hardened set of their jaws, the nightmares that woke them in the dark. They had seen an evil that defied mortal words. Some responded by building new septs or altars to the old gods, seeking blessings or perhaps insurance against the future. Others established local traditions of lighting winter fires or forging tokens of dragoglass if they could find any. In Lannisport, a new statue was raised to commemorate those who had perished. In the Stormlands, the Baratheon family had a tapestry woven depicting white-haired specters battling knights beneath swirling green lights, a stylized interpretation of the auroras witnessed in the far north. The tapestry might not be strictly accurate, but it served as a visual reminder of the day men stood on the edge of oblivion and did not yield. In the north itself, life rolled on as it always did. The snows lingered, the nights were cold, but that deeper sense of dread had lifted. Winterfell settled back into a pattern of measured calm. Lord Roderick Stark continued to rule with a steady hand, though his hair seemed to have gained a streak of pure white from the strain. He made certain that obsidian weapons remained locked away in the armory, carefully inventoried. He corresponded with the Night's Watch often, ensuring the wards on the wall remained stable. Occasionally, the Watch's rangings reported glimpses of shapes in the distance, but never did they confirm any resurgence of White Walkers. If a stray white wandered, it was swiftly destroyed, ensuring no necromantic threat built up again. In the quiet that followed, the North faced more prosaic challenges, crop shortages from the extended cold, tensions with mountain clans, and the rebuilding of ransacked holds. Yet overshadowing all that was a sense of relief. The Grand Alliance had saved the realm. They had done so long before the White Walkers could descend upon Winterfell en masse or sweep into the Riverlands and beyond. The cost had been high, but it could have been infinitely worse. For the Starks, these events carried another legacy, the forging of new ties with houses that had once been distant or mistrustful. When Miles Stark escorted caravans of goods south, he found a friend in Brian Tully who had fought alongside him. They exchanged recollections of the battle as they rode the roads that connected the North and the Riverlands. This bond opened channels of trade that might not have existed otherwise, ensuring that ships from the Trident carried fish and grain north, while the North provided timber and furs. Tales spread of the budding friendship between the wolf and the trout, binding the realms more tightly. Lysara Stark, who had always possessed a keen mind for stewardship, assumed more responsibilities at Winterfell. She had proven her valor in battle, but she did not relish the memory of crossing swords with an inhuman foe. Instead, she poured her efforts into fortifying the North's defenses. She supervised the forging of new arrowheads hammered out of whatever dragonglass the Starks could procure from the caverns at Dragonstone or from caches discovered in remote corners of the North. She had no illusions that the White Walkers were gone forever. Perhaps not in her lifetime, but she wanted House Stark prepared for the day they rose again. Lord Roderick supported these measures. He also found himself giving more frequent thanks to the old gods, spending hours at the godwood beneath Winterfell's ancient heart tree. He would run a hand across the carved weirwood face, remembering the ephemeral presence of the children who had once emerged from the shadows to save humanity. Sometimes, if the wind was just right, he fancied he heard the echo of their songs swirling through the branches. On one such morning, Miles found him there, and father and son spoke in hushed voices about the burden of memory. Roderick knew he would not live forever. He intended Miles, Lysara, and all his other children to carry on the vigilance to ensure that men never again forgot what lay beyond the wall. Word of the watchful calm in the North filtered south, reassuring the small folk. The so-called crisis of the others gradually receded from the forefront of daily life. Merchants resumed trade, knights returned to tournaments, and the lords of Westeros eased back into their intricate game of alliances and rivalries. If old disputes resurfaced, House Frey quarreling with the Tullis, House Aaron eyeing the Vales passes, these matters felt almost trivial compared to the cosmic horror that had been averted. Yet men were men, and their capacity to forget or to cling to grudges was persistent. Still, a certain shift underlay the realm's politics. King Aelor Targaryen, while not the mightiest or most cunning of Targaryen kings, recognized that the memory of this near apocalypse had encouraged a new sense of unity. He did not wish to squander that goodwill. He invited representatives from each region to King's Landing for a formal feast of Thanksgiving. This event, while far grander than the makeshift gatherings in Castle Black, carried an undercurrent of awe as the participants recounted their experiences. To speak openly of White Walkers over cups of Arbor Gold was surreal. Yet the many lords who had fought or sent men north offered toasts that rippled through the Red Keep's halls. Prince Burin, though uncertain if he desired the pomp, stood at his father's side as guests arrived. He wore the black and red finery of House Targaryen, his Valyrian steel sword sheathed at his hip. That sword, newly famous, bore the name Black Flame. Courtiers stared at it with hushed respect. Rumors said the blade had dealt a mortal blow to another, and indeed, faint cracks still marred part of its dark rippled steel, as though the cold that clashed against it had never quite released its hold. The feast was luxurious. The royal kitchens prepared swan, venison, fresh fish, spiced wine, crusty loaves, and pastries shaped like dragons breathing sugar flames. Jugglers entertained, minstrels sang. Lords from across the 7 kingdoms mingled, forging new alliances or renewing old acquaintances. Yet from time to time, all eyes drifted to the far corner of the hall, where a single, slender spear leaned against a display stand. Crafted of pale weirwood and tipped with obsidian, it was the spear Lord Roderick Stark had received from the Children of the Forest. He had brought it at the king's request to be displayed during the ceremony. Some found it unsettling, an artifact of an older power. Others regarded it with reverence, a tangible reminder that humankind was not alone in the world. Lord Roderick himself attended, accompanied by Lady Alice, Lysara, and Miles. They did not travel lightly. Winterfell was too large a domain to leave unguarded, but Roderick deemed it important to honor the crown's invitation. The presence of Starks in the Red Keep was always a curiosity for southern courtiers. Many gazed at them as if they were beings from another realm. But after all that had transpired, a certain fascination and deference now tempered the usual arrogance some Southrons displayed. On the 3rd evening of celebrations, King Aelor presided over a solemn ceremony. The great hall was filled with torchlight. Courtiers in their finery lined the walls. Among them stood the Stormlander envoy who had survived the battles, the Tyrell scholar who had assisted in forging obsidian arrowheads, and the Lannister bannermen who had fought valiantly in the final stand. All wore the faces of those who had seen fearsome things. The king rose from the Iron Throne, a seat of fused swords that seemed less formidable somehow after men had witnessed swords of pure ice, and bade Prince Burin approach. A hush fell. King Aelor spoke in a resonant tone, praising his son's courage and awarding him the ancient Valyrian title, Shield Against the Cold. It was symbolic, hardly a rank recognized in formal heraldry, but it carried weight that night. The court applauded. Burin bowed, accepting the distinction with calm grace, though an introspective glint showed in his eyes. He knew that true credit belonged to many, from the Watchers in bronze to the knights who gave their lives in the snow. Next, the king beckoned Lord Roderick Stark. In the darkest hour, Aelor proclaimed how Stark led the North in forging an alliance with the Children of the Forest, an alliance not seen in living memory. We owe them all a debt beyond measure. Let this night reaffirm the friendship between the Crown and the Wardens of the North. May the memory of this unity guide us should darkness ever stir again. Roderick stepped forward, bowing in the austere northern style. His thick cloak of dire wolf fur brushed the marble floor. He accepted the king's gratitude but answered simply, "We did only as our forebears did, your grace. We guarded the realms of men as is our duty, and we will do so again if the need arises." Unsurprisingly, the feast ended with many a toast in sweet wines and spiced Alesh. The courtly bards, some traveling minstrels who had gleaned second-hand accounts of the battles, sang newly composed ballads of the Winter's Reckoning or the Night's Alliance, weaving in flourishes about shadowy fey creatures and walls of living ice. Those who had been there recognized the flamboyant exaggerations, but no one bothered to correct them too harshly. The main thrust was true enough. Men and the children had won a mighty struggle against the White Walkers. When the feast concluded and the guests dispersed, Lord Roderick quietly arranged to bring his family north again. In his heart, he felt ill at ease in the lavish corridors of the Red Keep. He missed the austere comfort of Winterfell's Godwood, the hush of snowfall. More than that, he knew the realm's healing had only begun. The farmland and villages in the north needed help recovering from a harsh winter and from the men's long absence. There were families that had lost their breadwinners, wives who had lost husbands, children who had lost fathers. Some forms of damage were not so easily mended. Prince Burin, though parted from the Starks once more, promised to write often. He admired their unyielding dedication and hoped to maintain stronger ties between King's Landing and the North. For the first time in many years, it seemed like the North and the Crown might remain in genuine solidarity. Of course, Southern politics would swirl on. Rivals in the small council might seek to undermine Burin's position. House Lannister and others could well scheme to turn these newfound alliances to their own advantage. But for the time being, a tenuous peace endured, thanks to the memory of a common enemy more fearsome than any mortal could contrive. Months slipped by. The days lengthened. Cautious talk of an early spring circulated, though the North always remained behind the southern climates. One day, a messenger from the Vale arrived in Winterfell, reporting that the mountain passes had cleared earlier than expected, and that fresh caravans of grain were making their way up the King's Road. Another message from the Riverlands indicated that the last snows were melting along the Trident. The rest of Westeros might soon see the green shoots of a new season. In the north, that merely meant that the worst of the cold had relented. Still, it was reason enough for subdued hope. As life returned to something resembling normalcy, stories of the battle beyond the wall became a kind of shared legend. Small folk in the villages around Winterfell repeated them in hushed awe, pointing at travelers with missing limbs, calling them heroes. Children who had been frightened by winter's gloom found strength in the knowledge that their fathers, or their fathers' lords, had stopped an ancient evil. Around hearths, old gaffers retold the tale of seeing the children in the courtyard of Winterfell, describing their leaf-like cloaks and golden, shimmering eyes. Many refused to believe such stories until they were shown the spear or the trove of dragonglass arrowheads stored in the Stark armory. Even then, some shook their heads, certain it was a trick or some conjurer's show. Yet those who had been there knew better. They recalled the hush that preceded the final ritual, the flicker of greenish light in the swirling snow, the moment when the White Walkers recoiled under an ancient power they had not expected. Even among the free folk, recollections persisted in the form of new songs. A certain lore speaker north of the wall, what free folk called a living memory, shared accounts around fires of how men and the children stood side by side once more. It became a prideful piece of free folk heritage, that they had joined in the stand and proven their worth. The lines between Wildling and Kneeler had blurred in that desperate campaign. But as time does, it softened the edges of memory. Within a couple of years, the pressing dread of the White Walkers receded into the background. New births, fresh crops, petty feuds, these claimed attention. The wards upon the wall remained, quietly humming with the energy that the children had woven. But only the Night's Watch and House Stark seemed to pay them much mind. The rest of Westeros gradually returned to politics as usual. King Aelor grew older, delegating more authority to his small council. Prince Burin, having tasted real danger in the north, found the cutthroat intrigues of the court distasteful. He did his duty but yearned for more direct ways to serve the realm. Whenever possible, he corresponded with Roderick or Lysara about patrol reports, or asked Marsh at the Night's Watch for updates from beyond the wall. He often reread the dusty tomes describing the creation of the wall, pondering the cyclical nature of the long night. He was not fool enough to believe that the White Walkers were gone forever. In the Riverlands, House Tully saw a resurgence in trade and a spurt of new fortifications, partly financed by the crown as a thanks for Tully involvement in the war. Lord Brian Tully, who had become heir after his older brother died childless, maintained a respectful relationship with the North. On rare occasions, he traveled to Winterfell with a small retinue, though always in warmer months, when the roads were passable. He and Lysara would speak quietly of the next generation, of ensuring their children recognized the importance of unity. Lysara shared how the forging of obsidian arrowheads had continued in smaller, more systematic ways, ensuring that House Stark's armory never ran short. Brian admired her practical approach, though he could not help but marvel that she was preparing for a threat that might not return for centuries. In the Reach, House Tyrell took a more academic interest in the events. The robed scholar who had participated in the final battle had since written a tract on the properties of dragonglass and the potential sources for it across Westeros. It circulated among learned maesters, stirring interest in excavating old volcanic sites or scouring the beaches of Dragonstone. But few lords had the patience to fund such endeavors unless they saw immediate profit. Over time, this work faded from the public eye, overshadowed by new political developments and the daily grind of feudal life. House Lannister, never one to be outdone, quietly sought to secure a supply of dragonglass as well. Tybolt Lannister, now advanced in age, directed certain envoys to approach the pyromancers in King's Landing, hoping to replicate some measure of the greenfire weapons that had proven useful. He had no illusions that the others would return within his lifetime, but a Lannister always planned for every outcome. His successors would have caches of black glass and perhaps improved wildfire if it came to that. He considered this a private matter, for boasting openly about hoarding obsidian might undermine House Lannister's image as the realm's golden cornerstone. House Baratheon, true to their tempestuous nature, showed less immediate interest in the secrets of the war. They boasted often of their knights who had braved the cold, singing ballads of valor in the mead halls of Storm's End. But once the realm relaxed, they turned their attention back to expansions of their fleets and local rivalries. Still, some knights who had faced the dead refused to let others dismiss the significance of that campaign. Ser Harold and his followers established a small chapel near Summerhall, dedicated to remembering those lost in the north. It attracted a few pilgrims, though mostly from among the families of those who had died. Through all of this, the children of the forest did not reappear. From time to time, a lone ranger north of the wall claimed to glimpse small footprints near ancient weirwoods. A few free folk told stories of glimpses, a fleeting shape in the corner of an eye, or a soft voice on the wind. But no further contact was made, and the Watchers in Bronze were never spotted again. They had returned to the secret depths of the land, carrying with them whatever remained of their strength. A year slid into the next, then into a handful more. The realm felt the stirrings of a more generous spring, a mild summer that blessed the fields with good harvests. The long winter that had threatened was staved off. Some said the ritual in the far north had driven away not just the White Walkers but the harshest edge of the cold, though maesters dismissed that as coincidence. Nonetheless, many toasted to the mild season, grateful that the land had a chance to recover. House Stark continued to watch. Roderick's hair was almost fully white now, his posture a shade more stooped, but his eyes remained keen. He oversaw the training of new recruits in Winterfell's yard, ensuring that each young soldier learned the basics of fighting with obsidian. "We do not know when the cold might return," he said in a low, steady tone to the men. "But if it does, you will be ready." The soldiers, many of whom had heard their fathers' or uncles' stories, took the lesson seriously. Lysara, taking up increasing responsibilities as her father aged, did not relent in these preparations. She organized hunts for game in the Wolfswood, she charted shipments of grain, she arranged for the melting of old steel into new forms. Her bandaged shoulder, wounded by a White Walker's blow, still ached at times in the cold. It was a permanent reminder that the dead were not a myth. She refused to let that lesson fade. Meanwhile, Miles traveled widely across the north, working to maintain good relations among the bannermen. He had discovered that, in the battle's aftermath, many of the lesser lords harbored questions. Why had the North alone borne the brunt of the White Walker's wrath? Why had some southern houses offered fewer troops than promised? Miles soothed these grievances as best he could, reminding them that the entire realm had united in the end, and that the wards on the wall remained thanks to that unity. Some cynics grumbled that the Southerners had walked away with songs and glory, while the North still carried the scars. Yet Miles's open, forthright manner won most of them over. Even the Lady of Bear Island, notoriously quick to anger, accepted Miles's assurances of the Crown's future support. Back in King's Landing, Prince Burin navigated the intricacies of court, using his renown to bolster alliances that supported stability. He also made subtle efforts to ensure the Iron Throne did not disregard the North's significance in the realm. Occasionally, he would journey to Dragonstone, curious about the island's volcanic caverns rumored to hold large deposits of obsidian. The Targaryens who oversaw Dragonstone accommodated him, though they found it strange that a prince of the royal line spent so much time in dark tunnels, sifting through black glass. Burin never found as much as he hoped, but every shard was shipped discreetly to the Crown's armory, insurance for a future threat. By the time 5 years had passed since the Great Campaign, the immediate memory of that war had begun to fade from the minds of those who had not witnessed it firsthand. Life in Westeros, shaped by petty rivalries and the daily churn of feudal obligations, resumed its usual cycles. Yet in the north, in the halls of Winterfell, a new tradition took firm root. Every year, on the anniversary of the final battle, the Starks oversaw a night of green lanterns. Glass lanterns tinted with flakes of ground dragoglass or copper oxide burned with a faint greenish hue, evoking the uncanny light that had swept across the sky when the children unleashed their magic. On that night, the courtyard lights glowed a soft jade. Men and women gathered to honor the memory of those who fell and to remember the tenuous alliance that saved humanity from the brink. No speeches were made unless someone felt moved to speak from the heart. Often there was simply a hush broken by the crackle of torches. But in that hush, the unity of men and the children lived on. They would look to the old gods' faces carved into the weirwood in the godwood, or to the shimmering reflection of starlight on the walls, and recall the echo of ancient songs. Roderick Stark stood at the heart of these observances, holding in one hand the spear the children had given him. Its obsidian tip remained razor-sharp, the runes still etched in the glass. He would gaze out at the assembly of Northmen, free folk representatives, and a scattering of Southerners who had decided to settle in the north for reasons of marriage or trade. At times, Roderick would speak, telling them what he had seen beyond the wall, telling them of the quiet, reserved power of the children of the forest, who had returned from secrecy to prevent the long night from overwhelming them all. He would remind them that vigilance is the price of survival, that if men ever again turned on each other recklessly, they risked letting the cold creep back in. When Roderick finally passed into the next world, worn down by years and the lingering effects of old wounds, the Green Lantern tradition continued under Lysara and Miles. His death was mourned across the north, and ravens flew to King's Landing, carrying word of the passing of the Lord of Winterfell who had been so pivotal in saving the realm. Prince Burin, by then a hardened statesman, traveled north for the funeral. The ceremony was held in the crypts of Winterfell, where ancient kings in the north slumbered. They laid Roderick to rest with a statue at his tomb, carved to show him seated, holding the weirwood spear across his lap. The statue's stony eyes stared out into eternity, vigil never broken. Some said that in the stillness of that crypt, a breeze stirred, carrying the faintest echo of a faraway flute-like song. A trick of the air, no doubt. But those present felt a shiver, recalling that men were not alone in this world. That memory lingered, urging them onward. Lysara, newly the Lady of Winterfell in her own right, though some would style her brother Miles as joint lord, took up the mantle of leadership with a resolve that would have made her father proud. She oversaw the storing of obsidian, the continuing alliances, the readiness of their forces. In many ways, she was the practical mind of the Stark line, ensuring that each generation was taught about the White Walkers and how to fight them. Miles, for his part, continued to handle diplomatic matters, forging stronger ties with the Crown and the other great houses. Thanks to the memory of the war, House Stark's position in the realm was secure, and none doubted that if another threat arose, the North would stand at the forefront. They called it the Wolf's Burden. Decades passed in the turning of the seasons. Children grew to adults, took on responsibilities, and replaced the old generation. The realm had its quarrels and occasional border disputes, but none rose to the scale of civil war. Perhaps the shared memories of what they had faced kept them from descending into large-scale conflict. Or perhaps it was simply that none had the appetite to tear the realm apart, now that it had escaped a brush with apocalypse. And so, in quiet corners and secret glens, one might still wonder if the children of the forest walked silently, checking the wards from time to time. The Watchers in bronze might stand sentry near hidden grottos, ensuring the weirwoods thrived and that the icy powers of the others remained dormant. None could say for certain. The best that men could do was remain prepared, keep the old alliances in spirit, and not let memory fail. Generations on maesters would puzzle over thick tomes describing the Great Alliance beyond the wall, some penned by participants of the battle, others compiled from second-hand accounts. They would debate the authenticity of certain details. Did green fire truly erupt from the ground, or was that an exaggeration of the runes that glowed beneath the snow? Did the White Walkers truly appear in such numbers, or did fear inflate the count? Many academic squabbles would ensue, but the broad strokes were never in doubt. Bards also continued to sing of it, though each century's retellings drifted further from the truth. More heroes were added, more fantastic elements introduced. The children grew wings in some songs, or House Stark was said to wield swords of flaming iron. Still, the essence remained. The living had banded together with help from an ancient race to fend off a threat that came in the cold darkness. Yet the North remembered. Even if the South eventually dismissed the stories as fables, the North held them close. Lords and ladies of Winterfell were taught the line of Starks who had made that fateful choice. They kept the weirwood spear and the war banners used on the plateau displayed in a place of honor. On bitter nights, the steward lit extra braziers in the courtyard as if expecting unbidden guests. And near the castle's gates, carved into the stone, a new motto was occasionally whispered: keep the wards, guard the realm. Through the centuries that followed, the realm was not free of strife. There were new quarrels and lesser wars, all the usual dancing of house loyalties. But that existential terror, the White Walkers, did not advance again in that age. Some credited House Stark's unwavering vigilance. Others thought the wards the children had woven remained potent. A few cynics argued that the White Walkers were never truly real, but most were wise enough to heed the warnings enshrined in the annals of the Night's Watch. And so the what-ifs of history took a kinder turn than they might have. Instead of the Walkers marching unopposed on Winterfell centuries hence, only to be met with an unprepared realm, they were met early, confronted by the living who refused to be broken. The blood spilled on the snow created a bond that spanned from the earliest myths to the present day, a living tapestry of men and children, each playing their part. Sometimes in Winterfell's Godwood, a child with a curious heart would look up at the ancient heart tree. If that child listened carefully, they might swear they heard a faint, melodic murmur in the branches. Perhaps it was merely the wind. But in that hush, one might recall that the old gods still watched, that the children once walked there openly, and that the realm was saved by a unity bridging mortal hearts and primordial magic. Thus did Westeros move forward, carrying in its bones the memory of what might have been the darkest era in living memory. Lords quarreled, armies drilled, small folk tilled the fields, and the seasons turned as seasons do. But every so often, a hush would fall over the north, and eyes would drift to the horizon, where the snows of the lands of always winter lay beyond sight. In that hush, the living would remember. We are not alone, and the cold must never be underestimated. No matter how many years passed, no matter how many crowning or funerals or feasts took place, a piece of that alliance endured. It abided in the unspoken pact between men and the children, sealed in blood and bound by ancient songs. The White Walkers had been halted long before they could unleash the new long night upon Winterfell, and in that victory was the seed of hope. If the cold returned tomorrow or in 1,000 years, there would be those who remembered how to stand against it. And so the living endured, forging their stories into the deep places of the realm, clinging to the promise that, when the darkness rose again, men and the children would rise to meet it, as they had done once before, beneath the swirling green lights of a winter sky.